Big and getting bigger. That's been the story of Texas's population growth, but new census numbers suggest a new chapter being written. That today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. A new report from the Census Bureau complicates the story of population growth in Texas. Today, the state's demographer helps us do the math. Canceled elections in some parts of Texas, though not for nefarious reasons. We'll hear the why and how. Full speed ahead on data centers? Not so fast. We'll hear about a Texas county hitting the pause button on development. Also, in the 40 years since La Bamba made him a household name, Diamond Phillips reconnects with his Texas roots. Our conversation and a whole lot more coming up today on the Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 15th day of May. I'm David Brown. Great to have you with us. And as longtime listeners know, there's been a through line in our 10 years plus on the air. The story of Texas in the 21st century has very much been shaped by rapid growth, booming cities, a steady influx of new residents. But new U.S. Census data suggests a new chapter in that story, a narrative that's starting to shift. Texas is still growing faster than any other state from what we can tell, but that growth is no longer concentrated in its biggest cities. Instead, some of the state's largest urban centers like Dallas, Plano, Arlington, Austin actually lost residents last year, even as smaller outer ring suburbs are growing at some of the fastest rates in the country. At the same time, cities like Houston, San Antonio, Fort Worth still adding people, just not at the pace Texas has seen in recent years. So, what seems to be driving this reshuffling? A slowdown in international migration? Well, that's got to be part of it, right? But what about, housing costs, demographics, changing ideas about where and how folks want to live? And what does all this mean for the future of growth in Texas? To help us tease some of this out, we are joined by Lloyd Potter. He is the Texas State Demographer. Lloyd, welcome back to the Standard.
Thank you, David. It's good to be with you.
Texas continues to grow in terms of population. Let's talk about that aspect first, if we can. Where did we see the biggest growth from what you can tell?
Well, of course, Texas added more population than any other state. So, and the most recent set of population estimates suggests that growth has slowed, as you were referring to. And much of that growth slowing is attributable to the decline in international migration. So that's essentially, a lot of that has to do with what's happened with the current administration, that the border has been pretty well locked down. And so we have very few refugees crossing the border and very few unauthorized immigrants. And then that's, I think, kind of the U.S. policy around immigration also has slowed legal immigration as well. So that's one factor. And then the other factor is declining birth rates. So we're kind of seeing, actually, the number of children is going up, but being born is going up, but it's going up slower than it has.
I see.
Because of birth rates, because our population is still growing. So we're still adding more babies year after year, but not a whole lot more. And it's slowing in terms of the amount of growth.
Yeah,
so that's resulted in slowing of the growth in Texas. And then you kind of look at the geographic areas around, and there's a lot of variation there.
Let's look at those geographic areas where there continues to be high growth, or the highest growth. If you were to circle those places on a map, anything they have in common?
Yeah, they tend to be suburban ring cities that are in the suburban ring counties. And so, when we look at Texas, it had I think 5 of the fastest growing cities in the country, and 4 of those were in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Wow.
And when you look at that, they're all kind of out in these suburban ring counties. So like Collin County, Rockwall. And so when you kind of look at the fast growth that's kind of happening out in the suburban rings, and as you noted earlier, the urban cores are slowing their growth. Dallas County has had net out domestic migration for some time, but now that's actually gotten to the point where, with declining immigration, that's not offsetting the net outflow of domestic migrants. And so we actually see the city of Dallas now actually losing population. So So that's kind of a change as well. And then Houston's growth, as you noted earlier, has slowed pretty dramatically. Austin's has slowed very dramatically as well.
And yet, even though Austin's growth has slowed, Austin hit a sort of milestone, right? 1 million people for the first time.
That's right. So Austin playing with the big boys, I guess you could say, because I think there's something like 12 cities that have more than 1 million. So Austin's now part of that small group.
That's amazing. That is truly amazing. You think about all the newcomers who came here because it had all the advantages of a large city, but smaller population, and not really the case anymore. And that's been remarkable change just over the past 1.5, 2 decades. Anything surprised you in these numbers, Lloyd?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is really interesting is we look at some of the areas that historically were like the fast growing places, trying to think like Pearland, Irving, so areas kind of just outside of the urban cores, which were growing really fast.
Yeah.
Those now have slowed, and now we're seeing a bunch of them having negative population change. So they're actually losing population. So that was, to me, a little bit surprising that you have some places that seem to be economically, Plano would be an example. Plano is a city that was, one of the fastest growing in the country about a decade ago, and it actually lost population here this year. So that's pretty significant.
Do you see this as perhaps a temporary post-pandemic reshuffling, or does this signal a longer-term shift away from urban cores?
Well, historically, and this is kind of worldwide historically, we've kind of seen certainly people moving from rural places into urban cores, but then essentially you kind of have this concentric pattern of population development where you kind of have the suburban rings kind of growing and then further and further out. Sometimes the urban cores, we've seen them be able to turn around and kind of attract people back to the urban cores. And we certainly have seen that. I think about San Antonio. When I first moved there, I think in 2008, the downtown was there was nobody there. At nighttime, the only people that you'd see would be tourists. And now there's apartments and condos and so on downtown. And that's kind of really changed what downtown looks like. And Houston's made some efforts to do that. I think Dallas has as well. And I know Austin has.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have time to dig into this, but one can't help but imagine how this is going to affect Texas politics and, where influence and power sit in Texas over the next, say, decade or so. What do you see as the big takeaway? What's the headline, if you had to write a headline from this report?
We're still growing fast, still growing a lot, but the patterns of the geographic distribution of those population changes have shifted. And then again, we're kind of seeing these declines that which I was saying earlier, a little bit of a surprise. So that's it.
Lloyd Potter is the Texas State Demographer. Lloyd, thanks so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It was good to be with you.
Arlington, Irving, Hurst, Euless, Bedford, Grapevine, Colleyville, Grand Prairie, and more. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the suburbs that separate the two biggest cities are often called the mid-cities. If you know, you know. You know? Well, now you know. But did you know this? In several of those mid-cities, elections were canceled. Some were, anyway. KERA's Andy Lusk explains the reasons are far from nefarious, however.
This year, a number of mid-cities didn't have elections for city council members. That's because candidates vying for these seats ran against no one. Eric Wang ran unopposed for a city council seat in Southlake. He was sworn in May 5th. This was his first time seeking election.
Kind of a surreal and very humbling experience because for several years, I've always sat in the audience and really looked up towards a lot of the great leaders, the selfless volunteers that sat on the dais.
Wang says he has deep community roots and has been involved with city government in the past as a volunteer. These connections made him want to seek office, even if it meant running a competitive campaign. He says he was ready to campaign no matter what. But after discussions with city officials and other residents, Wang ran without competitors. He encourages others to get involved in city government.
getting involved really yields dividends in terms of being able to give back to the community, see what you're able to do for your neighbors, your friends, the other families in town.
More than 24 city council candidates won their races without going through the usual campaign process, including in cities like Mansfield, Grapevine, and Haltom City.
I think the fact that uncontested races are so common doesn't mean that the commonality is not troublesome.
That's Southern Methodist University professor Cal Jilson. He's a political scientist and author.
A candidate that is not contested, particularly in the general election, is not being watched very closely.
Generally speaking, Jilson says this can lead to candidates listening more to citizen groups like local clubs than to a broad swath of constituents. He says there's also more to it than meets the eye when it comes to these nonpartisan local races featuring partisan politics. Candidates sometimes signal their leanings without necessarily stating them outright. Even when candidates run without a D or R next to their names, Jilson says the Democratic and Republican parties are paying attention.
Part of a party's mandate is candidate identification, grooming candidates, and preparing them to run for office. So if one party is dominant in an area, they may have a more effective candidate identification and selection mechanism or process.
Seeing an uncontested race isn't rare or unique to Texas or other Republican-dominant states. Jilson pointed to other states with high rates of elections with only one candidate in the running, like Deep Blue Massachusetts. So what would it take to get more people to run for office? Jilson says it's a difficult question to answer.
Getting more people to run is getting people to understand the commitment of time, effort, and money that they may be signing up to make.
Those running unopposed are usually incumbents. As for the city side of things, there are advantages to canceling unopposed elections. Kira Seeger is the deputy city secretary in Mansfield. She says state law requires cities to cancel general elections when candidates run unopposed. That requirement comes with benefits.
The major advantage is that we are saving the city so much money by canceling our election.
Cities work with county elections offices to run local races. That includes printing ballots. Seeger noted that runoff elections can push costs even higher. Candidates certified as running unopposed wait to be sworn into office until the general election cycle is over, like all other winners. Seeger says residents interested in running for local office should reach out to their city secretary for information. I'm Andy Lusk in Dallas.
The intersection between mental health and the criminal justice system. Texas has a framework, and it didn't come from just nowhere either. We're going to find out about its origins as the Standard continues.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Casa. For a child in foster care, small moments today can have a big impact tomorrow. More on how lending time and support can help make a difference at becomeacasa.org. Support for Texas Standard comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Mental Health Awareness Month has been observed since 1949 every May, and this year, KACU's Josiah Wanell is taking a closer look at a persistent intersection between mental health and the criminal justice system. It's a series he's calling Minds on Trial. Texas has built a framework to address that intersection with specialty courts, special legislation, teams, and the like, but that architecture didn't emerge from the clear blue. Today, Josiah traces it back to the courthouse where the blueprint was first drawn, a blueprint known as the Miami model.
Judge Steve Leifman spent 3 decades on the bench in Miami-Dade County. He did not set out to become one of the most referenced names in American mental health justice reform. He set out to fix a problem in front of him, and what he built has since drawn researchers, legislators, police chiefs, and advocates from across the country, all traveling to South Florida to study what is now called the Miami model. The foundation of that model is not a court. It is not a piece of legislation.
Crisis Intervention Team Police Program. It's a 40-hour training program that teaches law enforcement how to identify individuals in crisis, how to de-escalate the situation, and where to take them once you successfully de-escalate the situation rather than arresting them.
That program, Crisis Intervention Team Training, or CIT, operates on a straightforward premise. The officer's role in a mental health call is not to impose order, but to restore safety. The distinction matters enormously in practice. Miami did not ask officers to start responding to these calls, but it trained them to respond differently, and it did so at scale.
We now have the largest trained squad of CIT officers in the United States. We have over 9,500 officers trained. They do absolutely amazing work.
Claims about program effectiveness are common in criminal justice reform. The results reframe what becomes possible when law enforcement and clinical response are aligned.
The number of arrests in Dade County went from 118,000 a year to 53,000. Our jail audit went from 7,400 to 4,400. And our police shootings almost stopped.
That final data point, the reduction in police shootings, opens a dimension of the Miami model that is rarely part of the public conversation about mental health reform. It demands a candid look at what officers themselves are carrying into these calls.
Between 15 and 35% of police officers have very severe PTSD. And so we set up a treatment program for police officers outside their departments so that they would be comfortable getting treated. And you have to understand that last year and the year before that and the year before that and so on, more police officers died from suicide than in the line of duty.
In recognition of that reality, Miami built a confidential treatment program for officers outside their departments, a place where they could receive care without professional consequence. The effect on use of force outcomes proved measurable. When the city commissioned an analysis of police shootings before and after the program launched, the data told a clear story.
The city of Miami did an analysis for us, and they looked at the number of police shootings the 5 years before we started CIT, and there were 90, which is a lot. That's one police department. And over the next 15, 20 years, it was down to like 12 or 13.
Leifman attributes that reduction not only to better tactical training, but to the mental health of the officers themselves.
I think PTSD among law enforcement also plays a significant role, maybe a larger role. And it turns out that when we get officers treated and they don't panic when they're in a situation where they may get scared, they're less likely to pull a trigger than not if they're doing emotionally better. So everybody wins there when you do that.
The financial implications of that shift were eventually recognized beyond law enforcement. When Miami's mayor presented the city's bond rating for review, the reviewer set aside the economic development data and focused on one single question. How had the city reduced its police shootings so significantly? Lower shootings meant fewer settlements. Fewer settlements meant lower fiscal risk.
They were actually able to get their bond rating improved because they significantly reduced their police shootings. And the only thing that really had changed during that period was CIT.
Narrow the lens further to just the 1,000 individuals in that population who had been arrested 5 or more times. The numbers don't get smaller. They get more alarming.
Those 1,000 people spent 317,000 days in the Dade County Jail over 5 years. They cost taxpayers over $117 million. And we got nothing for it.
The phrase bears repeating, not as rhetoric, but as a policy reality. Releasing someone from custody without a treatment plan does not resolve a crisis. It defers it. The person returns, the call goes out again. The cycle continues at public expense. Leifman places that reality alongside a medical analogy that strips away any pretense of logic from the current approach.
We wouldn't treat people with cancer or heart disease the way we treat people with mental illnesses. I don't know why there's a difference. They're both organs. They're both getting damaged. If someone has a heart attack on the side of the street, we're not going to walk over them and pretend it didn't happen. We're going to call 911. An EMT is going to get sent to the scene. They're going to get the best possible care. They may be unconscious. They'll be taken to a hospital. If they need emergency surgery, they're going to get involuntary treatment against their will. No one's asked. But then they're going to have a really good shot at having a full and happy life. And insurance is most likely going to cover their cost. But God forbid you have a heart attack of the brain where you have a psychotic disorder. We're kind of scared of you. We're going to let you hang out on the street and watch your brain deficits increase by allowing your gray matter to get destroyed over a decade.
The post-arrest diversion track within the Miami model was designed to interrupt exactly that trajectory. When individuals identified in the jail as having serious mental illness were transferred to crisis stabilization within 72 hours rather than waiting months for trial, the outcomes were sufficient to change the position of the state attorney's office.
Recidivism dropped from about 75 to 20%, and the state attorney agreed to try it with nonviolent felony cases. Recidivism went from 75% to 6%.
Those numbers, sustained over time, eventually justified something that would have seemed implausible at the program's outset.
And you reduce your jail audit from 74 to 4,400, you actually are able to close the jail, which for us so far has saved Dade County about $239 million in actual savings.
It is a result that tends to silence the argument that reform is too expensive to attempt. Leifman's summary of the model is characteristically direct.
So we know treatment works. We know that the faster we get people treated, the better outcomes we're going to get. And when you do this whole approach, everybody wins. I think there's really three reasons. I think one is it improves public safety. Two, it saves critical tax dollars. And three, it gives people who are just sick an opportunity to have a life of hope and opportunity. And there's really no reason not to do it, because the way we do it now is expensive, it doesn't work, it makes things worse, and it frustrates the heck out of everybody.
That is the conclusion Miami reached after 25 years of data. It is the conclusion Texas is reaching through its own experience. I'm Josiah Winnell in Abilene.
In the next installment in Josiah's series, we'll go somewhere the data cannot, inside one family's experience from the very beginning. That's next week on The Standard.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Tom Perumian. A federal judge has temporarily blocked the new Texas immigration law from going into effect. SB 4 gives local authorities power to arrest immigrants suspected of illegally crossing into Texas. It also makes illegal entry into Texas a state crime. The judge said immigration is a federal issue and not subject to state laws. The mayor of Laredo says the migrants found Sunday in a train boxcar likely died long before arriving in the city.
But they were discovered here after hours of suffering and eventually dying several hours before arriving from what is commonly known as a heat stroke, severe heat stroke.
Laredo Mayor Victor Trevino says 5 of the 6 victims were from Mexico and Honduras. A 7th victim was discovered along railroad tracks in San Antonio. The train originated in Long Beach, California, and it's believed the individuals entered the boxcar in Del Rio last Saturday. Republican Governor Greg Abbott wants to make district attorneys eligible for impeachment and create a statewide prosecutor role handpicked by him. Abbott and his allies primarily criticized Democratic district attorneys for not bringing enough charges against offenders. That's why the governor says district attorneys should be subject to impeachment.
Every elected official in the state of Texas is subject to impeachment. No reason why there's some special treatment for district attorneys.
He denied that the tool could be used for political attacks. The governor also says a statewide prosecutor would pursue charges that local district attorneys don't. Unidentified human remains found in the backyard of a missing 6-year-old boy, Noel Rodriguez Alvarez, former home. KERA's Emily DeMott reports the Everman boy has been missing since 2022. His mother is charged with capital murder.
Cindy Rodriguez Singh was extradited to Tarrant County in August after FBI officials arrested her in India. At a Thursday press conference, law enforcement officials did not say what initiated the search of her former home. But Tarrant County District Attorney Phil Sorrells says their focus remains on Rodriguez Singh's prosecution.
We owe it to Noel. We owe it to our community to seek justice in this case, and we are determined to do just that.
The county medical examiner is working toward an official identification of the remains. Rodriguez Singh was deemed incompetent to stand trial in April, but the DA says they expect to prosecute her in the foreseeable future. I'm Emily DeMott in Dallas.
I'm Tom Perumian from the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com.
33 minutes past the hour Texas Standard Time, I'm Laura Rice. As we've detailed before, Texas is one of the country's hottest spots for new data centers. These are massive computing warehouses that companies use to power technology like artificial intelligence and cloud storage. Texas is a popular spot because of available power, land, and relatively few regulations. But some projects have been the target of backlash due to concerns over water and electricity use. The industry certainly has a gold rush feel to it at the moment, with developers moving fast to claim the choicest spots in the state. But a rural county in central Texas recently moved to press pause on new data centers for a whole year. Joining us now to tell us more is Hill County Judge Shane Brassel. Judge Brassel, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you.
Well, the commissioners of Hill County, which is located roughly between Dallas and Waco, recently approved a one-year pause on data center development. Can you describe the level of interest the developers have shown in Hill County over the last year or so?
The amount of interest it's been astounding. We're not actually really sure because most of the data center companies' projects do not talk to the commissioner's court until they've already bought property, already putting in requests for permits from TECQ and the local water authorities. So many times we don't actually know how many are looking at our county at one time. My guesstimation right now for Hill County is 8 to 10 projects.
Wow.
The majority of them are around 1,000 acres or more.
Why do you think Hill County is such an attractive spot for data centers?
Well, we are in a prime spot, and that is the problem. We're on I-35. There is a lot of what they call dark fiber that was buried on I-35 back when it was cheap to put in fiber. Those are fiber lines that aren't being used, hence dark fiber. And all they need to do is be plugged into, and they can run their data. We're also, and this is the key, a non-attainment zone. When you're getting your car inspected, you don't do smog testing here. So less emissions regulations, which is very attractive to them because they can speed up processing. I'm sure it's cheaper. But it also, that's one of the things that worries us is there are less regulations. So therefore, what could be pouring out into our communities?
You mentioned air quality concerns. What else have you heard from Hill County citizens that really struck you?
Well, the first, and I guess the biggest, is the water consumption. Yeah. That's our big worry. We have many people with wells in the county that are already having to either redig or just not use their wells because the water table is already dropping. And so the reason for the year-long pause was to try to wrap our heads around real data, real numbers. Every data center says they're only going to use as much water as a toilet in your house. And then everybody against them says they're going to use all the water. There's a truth somewhere in there, in between there, but we don't know what it is. No one does. And with 8 to 10 projects, 10 to 15,000 acres of Hill County being covered in a data center, even just the amount of them, we don't know the impact that they could have.
Well, you mentioned the county has been sort of the last ones to find out about these plans in some ways. What control do you have? What will this one-year pause allow you guys to do?
Well, we're hoping twofold. We're hoping that we can get some real research done. There are other data centers in the state, so we could potentially get some actual research done as to what those projects have done. The next portion of it is we're hoping that the legislature will step in and help out with this type of thing. There are very few regulations that the county can enforce. And so this isn't a rebellion against the state and the legislature and the lawmakers. This is us pleading for help.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, are you concerned at all about legal challenges, either from developers or even the state that really wants to position itself as business friendly?
Yes, very. It's a great question because every data center that has talked to us came in and said, hey, we're here to be a good neighbor. We want to take care of the people that live around these projects. We're here for the community. And then less than 24 hours, I received phone calls that they're going to sue us over this and ask for damages. I've received demand letters demanding that we rescind the moratorium. So it leads me to believe that their intent was never to be a good neighbor, if that's what it is. If you were wanting to be a good neighbor, I would expect that maybe you'd say, hey, Hill County, what can we do to help you guys be more comfortable with these projects, get these studies done? How can we help do that? At least that's what we would consider a good neighbor in Hill County.
We've been speaking to Hill County Judge Shane Brassel about his county's one-year pause on data center development. Judge Brassel, thanks again for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for having me.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the online UT High School, offering a full-time diploma program for remote, asynchronous learners throughout Texas. More at highschool.utexas.edu/tuition-free. Support for Texas Standard comes from TrialMed, conducting clinical research for over 30 years. Info on current trials in Texas at trialmed.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. Lou Diamond Phillips has been acting for decades, but his breakout role was so iconic, it's the one he's largely still associated with. He played Richie Valens in 1987's La Bamba, and then went on to shine in Stand and Deliver and Young Guns, among others. More recently, he starred in Longmire. His latest film is Keep Quiet, where he plays a tribal police officer. It screened at the Dallas International Film Festival and is coming to Austin's Cine Las Americas. I caught up with Lou Diamond Phillips over Zoom.
You grew up in Texas, is that right? Can you tell me your story?
Yeah, no, grew up in Texas. Got to Texas from many places, abroad, and before that, my dad was in the Navy, and then ended up in Corpus Christi, right down there, by Naval Air Station Corpus Christi. That's where he retired, and so I got to Texas for my formative years, junior high, high school, and then went to the University of Texas at Arlington. So, all of my dreams, all of my aspirations, all of that, began right there in Texas. I majored in theater. When I was in high school, I did a lot of university interscholastic league, drama competitions. It was something I intended to do from a very young age.
Does it feel like Dallas, home still, or?
My dad is still down in Corpus, and I got a ton of friends still there. So it does, in many respects. Although I've lived, I was in LA for 30 something years and been in New York now for 7. I have some high school friends coming to have dinner with me in Austin at the Dallas International Film Festival recently. A ton of high school friends, college friends, acting school friends. So my connections to Texas run deep and are eternal.
Oh, well, you mentioned the Dallas International Film Festival. You won this Dallas Star Award while you were there this year. How great was that? What was that like?
It's again, and it's it's a little like going to Austin and being given the key to the city. I mean, that's the Chamber of Commerce has come up with a nice little welcome package for me, which is really beautiful. But it's a full circle event, where as I said back in the day, in my teenage years, I dreamed of being where I am now, and to be able to come back wearing that and owning that and not being done. It's an ongoing career. It's very gratifying.
Well, I think you've become an icon a bit. And I was going to ask you about that because I know you've been asked about this before, but you're really an icon, especially in the Latino community, because of your work with La Bamba and Stand and Deliver. And I wonder what that's like for you, because some people might know that your background is a little different than what you've played on screen.
I'm half Filipino with some, little Hawaiian, Chinese, a lot of sort of Pacific theater stuff going on there. And then, believe it or not, like Scott Irish English, there's a healthy dose of Scandinavian in there as well, and a drop of indigenous blood. But, back in the day, I fit the bill. I was ambiguously brown. But since that time, I've been very, very proud to represent a number of communities, and even more proud that they not only have accepted me, but have elevated me in the platform. I mean, I get approached, from Latinos all the time, about what La Bamba means to them, what Stand and Deliver means. A lot of people in the indigenous communities. I've been adopted into the Cheyenne Nation, into the Lakota Nation. Fortunately, I take that as a sign that I did them proud, which is what I set out to do. Being, a performer of color, it's like, okay, you have to represent with some respect, not just use it as a piece of wardrobe. So my attitude from the beginning has always been go to the source and represent it to the best of my abilities. I mean, that's very true of Keep Quiet. It's an indigenous story. It takes place on the reservation. We make sure to mention that I am not indigenous in the film, that I married into it.
I caught that. Yeah. And your coworker's a bit surprised because like you said, you could fit in the bill. Yeah.
100%. But that delineation allowed us a very interesting dynamic with the character, in that he is a perennial outsider. And that's in some ways I get that myself. Because I don't fit easily into anybody's box. Even Hollywood's, they didn't know what to do with me for a long time. Is he the brown brat packer? So because I sort of defy categorization, it's been an interesting path.
Well, I do want to get back to Keep Quiet, because it's a complex movie, and you play this really challenging and conflicted character. What would you want people to know about him?
I think that he's somebody that a lot of people can relate to. He certainly is the old bull to a certain extent. He's seen a lot, he's lived a lot, and he carries that with him. And in some respects, it's a burden. But it's a community that may never fully embrace him. I not only knew who he was, I've known guys like that. Somebody asked me, well, what kind of research did you do? And I said, well, I've been doing this, for 40 years. I played, God knows how many cops, so the research was, the living that I've, acquired up to this point. And that was incredibly attractive in the role, because, page 5, I saw myself in the role. I knew who this guy was and how I was going to play him.
Like you said, film festivals like Dallas International Film Festival, Cine Las Americas in Austin. I think I saw coming out in July in limited theatrical release. But what do you make of this moment for independent film? I mean, does this feel like something that you've seen in decades past in your career, or are the challenges new and different right now?
It ebbs and flows. Back when I did La Bamba and Stand and Deliver back to back, oh my goodness, we're going to have, a Latino wave, in cinema. It didn't happen. But in recent years, we've seen more filmmakers, more writers, more producers, more people telling their specific stories and them finding a universal audience to them. Things like, Minari, Moonlight. I mean, just a lot of smaller films that break through, and because they're done with love, and they're done with truth, capital T, in the middle of them. And what we're seeing now is we are seeing smaller films break through, but it really does take people who care. We're coming out in limited release in theaters, but it's almost like we're hand carrying it to a lot of places. I mean, it It is artisanal, it is handcrafted, and it is grassroots.
Lou Diamond Phillips stars in and executive produced the new film Keep Quiet, which is coming to Cine Las Americas in Austin and theaters hopefully near you in July. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Support for Texas Standard comes from HEB and the My HEB app, which is available for download, and shopping fresh departments like seafood, produce, bakery, and deli, and scheduling curbside pickup or home delivery. More at heb.com.
This is Sean Petrie with the Typewriter Rodeo, and we are a group of friends who type poems on the spot on whatever topics people want. Cowgirl, to the bone. This is for listener Robbie. It doesn't matter where I roam, I will always be a cowgirl, to the bone. No need for fanciness, I know my roots. Give me well-worn jeans and even more worn boots. And always nearby, my spurs and rope. A sleek party dress? Ha ha ha. Nope. Because I know my roots, I know my home. No matter what, cowgirl to the bone. This is Sean Petrie, and you're on Texas Standard Time.
You can check out the Typewriter Rodeo every Friday here on The Standard. Got a suggestion for your own custom poem? Send it over. We'll turn it into a little art. But now it's time for the week that was in Texas politics. Jasper Scherer's politics editor for the Texas Tribune. Jasper, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You know, just a few days ago, President Barack Obama made a surprise appearance in Austin at a taco shop to pose for pictures with a couple of Democrats, Senate candidate James Tallarico and gubernatorial candidate Gina Hinojosa. Didn't make any endorsements, just smiled for the cameras, said everybody go vote, and that was that. What was that about?
You know, there wasn't a whole lot, as you mentioned, no endorsements. They didn't make any public remarks there, but I think just, Obama's presence in the state this early in the campaign cycle, in a state that went to Trump by 14 points in 2024, I think it, lends a bit of validity to efforts by Democrats like Tallarico and Hinojosa to convince folks that they're viable and competitive. There's a big landscape, for the Senate with other states like Alaska and Maine that will be, also battling for attention. So it just, shines the spotlight on Texas and, might help Tallarico and Hinojosa maybe raise some money.
Do you have any idea why he didn't make an explicit endorsement during that stop?
I really couldn't tell you. I mean, I think, maybe there's some potential concerns about, what Obama's statewide favorability looks like, but at the same time, there are some... There's been polling that's come out since he left the White House that shows his popularity is going up. That kind of tends to happen when presidents leave. So
that's the truth. Yeah, absolutely. Let's shift gears to Attorney General Ken Paxton, also a candidate for U.S. Senate, as we all know, announcing he's investigating the Dallas County Sheriff for allegedly refusing to cooperate with ICE. What exactly is Paxton alleging here?
Yeah, this is a thing that sheriffs are required to do under a law that was passed by the legislature last year. And these formal agreements are part of this thing called the 287G program, which in most cases involves sheriffs who run the local jails agreeing to basically just do some sorts of immigration screening when folks come into the jail, and then notify ICE so they can come in and in some cases deport them. So the Dallas County Sheriff is saying, we haven't signed this agreement yet, but in practice, we are already doing that. And by the way, I've got until December to actually make it formal. So just more kind of state-local tension over public safety issues.
Yeah, speaking of state and local tension, I noticed that this week Governor Abbott announced that he's expanding a task force aimed at, quote, repeat offenders. We don't have time to dig in deeper on that, but I would encourage readers to take a closer look at that story over at texastribune.org. That's where you'll find more on all of these stories that we've talked about in this week's edition of The Week That Was in Texas Politics. Jasper Shearer joins us as politics editor for the Texas Tribune this time every Friday. And Jasper, we appreciate you joining us today. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Of course. Thanks for having me, David.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard.
When Texans talk about public schools right now, the conversation doesn't start with science fairs, football games, or band concerts as often as it should. Instead, it usually starts with money. I'm Wells Dunbar with the Texas Standard. And in the upcoming school year, Austin ISD is projecting a budget deficit of $181 million. Cy-Fair ISD near Houston is facing a $74 million shortfall. Plano ISD is looking at a $44 million deficit, and Mesquite ISD has braced for $24 million in cuts, including layoffs. As we reported this week, across the entire state of Texas, public schools lost roughly 76,000 students, one of the steepest enrollment drops outside the pandemic. District leaders point to inflation, rising costs, and competition from charters and private schools. And many say the state's funding simply hasn't kept pace since 2019. But behind all those numbers are classrooms and the people inside them. Karen Bernstein has spent much of the last 4 years substitute teaching in Eanes ISD, mostly with elementary school students. She says what she sees is a system leaning harder and harder on screens. Computers, she says, were supposed to help students to learn at their own pace. Instead, she worries Chromebooks are becoming tools for classroom control. She says teachers have fewer opportunities to actually teach creatively and more pressure to focus on test scores and performance metrics. And she says some families, especially those whose children struggle to fit in the traditional mold, are pulling away from public schools entirely. Others argue this moment should not become another obituary for public education in Texas. Catherine Huntsman told us, public education is the best way for us as a community and society to build the prosperous, healthy, and beautiful future that we all want. And she says many of the problems parents and teachers are frustrated by are not unsolvable, but they do require Texans to slow down, to understand what's happening inside schools, and commit to fixing it. Because whether families are leaving public schools, fighting for them, or simply trying to hold things together until the next school year, what's happening right now in Texas classrooms is bigger than a budget line. It's a debate over what public education is supposed to be. I'm Wells Dunbar, and this is the Talk of Texas.
It certainly is. Well, let me tell you about something. It looks like money. It feels like money. Even carries a bit of real gold. The state's new Texas Redbacks are called Texas Redbacks because of the red ink simulating currency used during the days of the Texas Republic. Now, officials say it's not legal tender, more like a novelty item, but a new lawsuit claims the state might have crossed a red line. That story, plus an update on what's been making news across the Lone Star State over the weekend on the next edition of the Texas Standard. Yes, indeed, the weekend is upon us. Big thanks to Jake Perlman in the control room here at Texas Standard Central in the Texas capital city. Hope you can join us again on Monday.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Woldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family. Would your company or organization like to be a sponsor as well? Contact your local station for opportunities within your community. For statewide sponsorships, visit TexasPublicMediaNetwork.com.